You're listening to Audiology. Support this channel by becoming a member, and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. In the winter of 1780 to 1781, the Continental Army, led by General George Washington, broke into smaller groups to make it easier to get the supplies they needed. Among these groups was the Pennsylvania Line, which consisted of about 2,400 soldiers stationed at Jockey Hollow, New Jersey, not too far from Morristown. The living conditions they faced were extremely harsh, a fact lamented in letters by both Washington and General Anthony Wayne, who led the Pennsylvania Line. They had previously pointed fingers at the state governments and the Continental Congress, blaming them for the difficulties due to corruption and indifference. The soldiers from Pennsylvania were especially disgruntled. Pennsylvania was notably tight-fisted when it came to paying its troops. Many of these soldiers had been fighting for 3 years and had received only a meager $20 bounty at the start. Meanwhile, soldiers from other states were getting much heftier enlistment bonuses. For example, New Jersey volunteers were given a $1,000 bounty, and even new recruits from Pennsylvania were given substantial bounties. Yet those who had been serving long-term had not gotten regular pay or bonuses for re-enlistment. By the start of 1781, the soldiers' frustration had reached a tipping point. Many of them, known as 3-year men, believed their term of enlistment, which was stated as for 3 years or the duration of the war, ended with the arrival of the new year. However, the Army's officers, desperate to keep their ranks filled, interpreted the terms to mean that the soldiers had to stay for the entire war if it lasted more than 3 years. Eventually, the Pennsylvania government conceded that the soldiers' understanding of their enlistment terms was the correct interpretation. On the first day of the new year in 1781, soldiers of the Pennsylvania Line threw a big New Year's Day party. That night, members from various regiments grabbed their weapons and planned to leave the camp without anyone's okay. Officers tried to stop this rebellion with the disciplined regiments, but after the rebels fired some warning shots, all the other regiments decided to join the mutiny instead of stopping it. Captain Adam Bitting, who led Company D in the 4th Pennsylvania Regiment, was tragically killed by one of these mutineers when he actually intended to harm a lieutenant colonel. Despite this loss, the revolt mostly didn't lead to other injuries or deaths. General Wayne stepped in, trying to talk the soldiers into giving up their protest peacefully. Although they agreed not to switch sides to the British, they were firm on not backing down until Pennsylvania addressed their complaints. Wayne kept an eye on his troops and sent messages to Washington and the Pennsylvania authorities about the situation. The soldiers then took over Princeton, New Jersey, for a bit, making it their temporary base, and chose a group of sergeants, led by Sergeant William Bouzar, a veteran from the British Army, to represent their interests and speak on their behalf. On January 5th, the Pennsylvania government was alerted to a mutiny within its ranks. This urgent situation led Joseph Reed, the head of the state's governing council, straight to the scene to diffuse the tension. In the meantime, George Washington, in a desperate plea, reached out to the Continental Congress and to the states of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. He asked for their support, highlighting the soldiers' terrible living conditions that sparked the Pennsylvania Line's defiance. Joseph Reed didn't waste any time. By the evening of January 6th, he was in Trenton, discussing the matter with Continental Congress representatives. Aware that the public and local militia might sympathize with the mutineers, the government knew it had no option but to negotiate with them. The following day, Reed made his way to Princeton to negotiate directly with the mutineers' representatives. Despite concerns that General Anthony Wayne's troops might not react well to Reed, the opposite happened. Wayne and Reed were even welcome to the extent that the soldiers wanted to give them a cannon salute, which they politely declined, fearing it might cause unnecessary alarm among local residents. On that same day, January 7th, a twist occurred. John Mason, representing the British commander in New York, General Sir Henry Clinton, showed up in Princeton. He came bearing a tempting offer to the mutineers: switch sides and receive back pay from the British. However, this outreach was fruitlessly bold. The mutineers detained Mason and his guide, refusing Clinton's proposal, but showing their integrity by reporting the incident to Wayne and Reed. Negotiations between Reed and the mutineers moved swiftly, focusing on a central demand. The soldiers insisted that those who joined in 1776 and 1777 for a $20 bounty should be allowed to leave or re-enlist under better conditions. Reed found the soldiers' complaints about coercive and abusive recruitment tactics compelling. He agreed to their terms, even going as far as to accept the word of soldiers without formal enlistment papers, allowing them to declare themselves as $20 men for discharge. In Trenton, Reed organized the process to start letting go of soldiers from the Pennsylvania Army on January 12th. They released about 1,250-foot soldiers and 67 gunners. By the end of this process on January 29th, the Pennsylvania Line was down to 1,150 men from an original strength of 2,400, but many of those who were let go ended up rejoining, and the various regiments welcomed back their former officers. After a mutiny within the line, there was a significant shuffle amongst the Pennsylvania regiments. Specifically, the 7th through 11th regiments were shut down, and those soldiers left were moved into the older, established units. Several units regrouped in different locations. The 1st Regiment got back together in Philadelphia under Colonel Daniel Brodhead's lead. The 2nd did the same in Philadelphia with Colonel Walter Stewart. The 3rd set up in Reading with Colonel Thomas Craig, the 4th in Carlisle under Colonel William Butler, the 5th in York with Colonel Richard Butler, and the 6th in Lancaster under Colonel Richard Humpton. All the common soldiers got a break and were sent home until March 15th, after which they returned to their units. By May, Wayne was moving the 2nd, 5th and 6th Regiments south to fight against the British in Virginia. The British agent named Mason was caught and executed for spying, and in a move that raised eyebrows, his civilian helper Ogden faced the same fate. George Washington, leading the Continental Army, was openly critical about how the mutiny was handled. On February 2nd, 1781, he wrote to Major General Nathaniel Greene expressing his disappointment. He said the resolution might have been the only option under the circumstances, but warned it set a bad precedent. This concern was validated when the soldiers of the New Jersey Line, motivated by the outcome of the Pennsylvania Line's actions, also mutinied. However, Washington took immediate and harsh action against this second mutiny, sending Major General Robert Howe to deal with it swiftly. Howe surprised the rebelling soldiers and forced them to surrender unconditionally, executing 2 of the ringleaders on the spot. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.